The lawyer looked down at the file, then up at me, and for a second he forgot everyone else in the courtroom. "Wait," he said. His voice had changed. Not louder, just sharper. "You're Emily Carter." My sister stopped smirking. The room had been half asleep until then. A probate clerk near the wall looked up from her notes. My sister's attorney frowned. I was standing at the respondent's table in a navy dress I had bought 8 years earlier for a church funeral, holding a paper cup of courthouse coffee that had already gone cold. 3 days earlier, my sister had stood in our parents' hallway and told me I was just the maid. Now a lawyer was staring at me like he had opened the wrong file. "Yes," I said. "I'm Emily." He looked back down, then at the deed, then at me again. And that was the moment the room went silent. But to understand why you have to go back before court, back before the funeral casseroles and condolence flowers and the awful stillness of a house after 2 people stop breathing in it forever. Back to the kitchen where I spent most of my life. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old. For 20 years I lived in my parents' house in a suburb outside Richmond, not because I couldn't leave. That's the version my sister liked. The simpler one. The one that made her look chosen and me look convenient. The truth is harder to explain because the truth usually is. Our house was a 2-story colonial with beige siding and a red front door my mother repainted every few years when she got restless. It sat on a quiet street with maples out front and the kind of neighbors who noticed when trash cans stayed out too long. Inside the house always needed something. A ride to a doctor, groceries, bills paid. The upstairs bathroom fan fixed. My father's blood pressure medication picked up before 6. The kind of work that fills a life without ever earning a title. My sister Sarah was 3 years older, beautiful in a way that caused trouble early, quick-tempered, charismatic when she wanted something, impossible when she didn't. She had a talent for making every room reorganize itself around her mood. As children, if she was corrected, she escalated. If she was told no, she packed a bag. If my parents asked her to help clean up after dinner, she would slam a cabinet, accuse my mother of favoritism, and threaten to leave. By 16, she had perfected the art of emotional hostage-taking. My parents were not weak people. They were just tired. That's the part I didn't understand then. My father worked 32 years at a regional bank. My mother taught 2nd grade until her knees gave out, and then she stayed home still moving like someone who heard a bell every hour and had to answer it. They loved us both. But they learned quietly and badly that peace was easier with Sarah if they stopped expecting things from her. So they expected them from me. Not with speeches, not with punishments, just through repetition. "Emily, can you load the dishwasher? Emily, can you run to the pharmacy? Emily, your father needs help with the taxes. Emily, your sister's upset. Can you just let it go? That's how some girls become useful. Not through praise, through absorption." At 14, I set the table. At 18, I was handling utility calls and balancing my mother's checkbook when she got overwhelmed. At 22, after a year of community college, and one disastrous engagement to a man who wanted admiration more than partnership, I moved back fully and never really left. At first I told myself it was temporary, then my father's first surgery happened. Then my mother's arthritis worsened. Then there was always one more reason to stay through another season. I worked too. That part gets erased in my sister's version. I wasn't unemployed. I wasn't drifting. I built a bookkeeping business from the dining room table, then expanded into small business accounting for local contractors' churches, and one dental office that never sent complete paperwork on time. I paid household expenses when needed, covered repairs quietly, bought groceries when my father's pension felt tight. But because my work was done at home, and because I was always physically present, Sarah recast me as domestic furniture, the helpful daughter, the one who never had somewhere more important to be. She moved in and out of cities. Charlotte, Atlanta, back to Richmond, then gone again. Each return came with a new hairstyle, a new grievance, and a new story about why the world had misunderstood her. She was between opportunities. She was consulting. She was taking a break. What she really was most of the time was underemployed and overindulged. Still, she never saw herself as dependent. She saw herself as special. My parents didn't exactly reward that, but they surrendered to it. That's different. And it took me far too long to understand it. If Sarah visited for a weekend and left 3 coffee mugs in the living room and wet towels on the guest bed, my mother would sigh and say nothing. If I forgot to take meat out of the freezer by noon, my father would ask what happened in a tone that carried disappointment. I interpreted that for years as favoritism. Maybe some of it was, but mostly it was exhaustion misapplied. They believed Sarah would break, so they prepared me not to. That's easy to admire in hindsight. Harder when you're the one carrying it. The year before they died, I had started feeling something close to resentment. Not dramatic resentment. A quiet, domestic kind. The kind that arrives while scrubbing a roasting pan after everyone else has gone to bed. The kind that sits in your chest while your sister scrolls her phone on the couch and asks if there's any more iced tea. I never yelled. That wasn't my style. But I got quieter. My mother noticed. One night, while drying dishes beside me, she said, "You always land on your feet." At the time, it felt insulting, like she was admiring my endurance instead of questioning why I always had to use it. I didn't answer. She didn't push. 3 months later, both my parents died in a car accident on Interstate 64 coming back from a church retreat in Williamsburg. A truck hydroplaned. The state trooper used the word instant in my living room, and I hated him for it, as if quickness reduced loss. Sarah arrived 2 hours after I called. Sunglasses on, phone in hand, dry-eyed until the funeral home appointment when people were watching. I handled everything. The pastor, the flowers, the death certificates, the casseroles, the dark dresses, the sympathy cards stacked in the silver tray by the front door. Sarah drifted through it all like a guest at a difficult event. Then, after the burial, when the last relatives had gone and the house finally emptied, she stood in the kitchen and looked around like she was seeing the place for the first time as property. I was at the sink, still in black, still washing dishes because apparently grief doesn't exempt the person who's always done them. She leaned against the counter and said, "You should probably start packing." I turned off the water. "What, this house is mine." I stared at her. She crossed her arms. "You were just the maid here, Emily." Her tone was casual, almost bored. "As soon as probate clears, I'm selling." I dried my hands slowly. "You don't know that." She smiled then. A small, ugly smile. "I'm the older child. That matters." "It doesn't." She stepped closer. "You lived here for free. You did chores. That's not ownership." I didn't answer. Maybe she mistook my silence for weakness. She usually did. "All of this is mine," she said. Then she glanced toward the hallway. "Our parents let you stay because someone had to do the work." That sentence hit me harder than the rest because part of me had believed it too. I said nothing. Not because I had no response, because grief had already taken enough from my nervous system, and I refused to give her the rest. 3 days later in probate court, a lawyer looked at a file, looked at me and froze. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, being the daughter who stayed in the house was about to mean something very different. The courtroom still hadn't recovered from the moment the lawyer stopped reading. He was standing behind the long wooden table reserved for counsel, one hand resting on the open folder in front of him. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. A clerk flipped through a stack of probate forms and then stopped when she realized no one else was moving. My sister Sarah had been leaning back in her chair with the relaxed posture of someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. Now she was sitting upright. What she said. Her voice came out sharper than she intended. The lawyer didn't answer immediately. He was still staring at the paperwork. Then he looked at me again. "You're Emily Carter." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. Sarah laughed. "Of course she is." She gestured vaguely in my direction as if introducing a piece of furniture. "She lived in the house with our parents." The lawyer didn't look at her. Instead, he closed the file halfway and spoke slowly. Ms. Carter, were you aware that your name appears on the property deed? The room went quiet again. Not dramatically, just the kind of silence that happens when everyone realizes they might have misunderstood the story. Sarah blinked. What? The lawyer turned the document toward her. Your parents added Emily as co-owner of the property 9 years ago. Sarah leaned forward. That's impossible. It's not. She reached across the table and grabbed the copy from his hands. I watched her eyes move down the page. The confidence drained out of her face in stages. First disbelief, then irritation, then something closer to fear. No, she said. They wouldn't do that. The lawyer spoke gently, almost professionally bored. They did. The judge looked over his glasses. Is there a dispute regarding the deed? Sarah shook her head automatically. Yes. Then she stopped herself. No. Then she tried again. There must be a mistake. There isn't, the lawyer said. He pointed at the signature lines. These were notarized and filed with the county. The judge leaned back slightly. And Ms. Carter has been listed as joint tenant since then. Sarah looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time that morning. You knew about this, no? The word surprised even me. But it was true. I had handled grocery lists, doctor visits, medication schedules, but no one had ever told me I was on the deed. Sarah laughed once, a strained, humorless sound. That's ridiculous. She waved the document. She doesn't own anything. The lawyer finally turned toward her. His expression had changed. Not hostile, just precise. Actually, she owns half the house. Sarah's jaw tightened. This house was ours. Yes. And now it legally belongs to both of you. The judge nodded. That appears correct. Sarah pushed her chair back slightly. This is insane. No, the lawyer said quietly. It's paperwork. I didn't say anything. Partly because I didn't trust my voice yet. Partly because my entire understanding of the last 20 years had just shifted half an inch to the left. Not enough to change everything, but enough to make certain memories look different. Sarah turned toward me again. You manipulated them. The accusation came quickly, reflexively. No, you were always in their ear. I lived there. Exactly. She stood up. This is unbelievable. The judge tapped his pen against the desk. Ms. Carter, please sit. Sarah sat down again, but the movement was stiff. The lawyer flipped through another page. There's also a clause regarding proceeds in the event of a sale. Sarah's head snapped up. What clause? He slid the document across the table again. Your parents stipulated that the house cannot be sold without Emily's consent. The silence that followed was thicker than before. Sarah read the sentence, then read it again. Her mouth tightened. So she can block the sale? Yes. She can force me to stay tied to this house forever. No. The lawyer leaned back slightly. She can simply refuse to sell. The judge cleared his throat. Ms. Carter, do you contest the validity of the deed? Sarah's shoulders rose and fell once. No. Her voice was tight. But I contest the fairness. The judge nodded slowly. Fairness is not a legal standard. Sarah looked at me again. You did this. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have something to say. Because I had spent 20 years learning that some accusations don't deserve immediate responses. The lawyer closed the file. We can schedule mediation if both parties prefer. Sarah shook her head. No mediation. Her voice had turned cold. This house will be sold. She looked at me. And she's not stopping it. The judge glanced in my direction. Ms. Carter. I folded my hands on the table. For 20 years I had been the quiet one in every room. The one who handled things. The one who absorbed inconvenience because conflict felt louder than I liked. But something about hearing my sister describe the house like it had always been hers made that instinct loosen slightly. My parents put my name on the deed, I said. Yes, the judge replied, and they required my consent to sell. Yes. Sarah's eyes narrowed. So I looked at her, then back at the judge. I'm not agreeing to sell. The room didn't explode. There were no gasps, just a small, precise shift in posture from everyone present. The lawyer leaned back in his chair. Sarah stared at me. You can't be serious. I didn't answer, because for the first time since my parents died, I felt something solid under my feet. Not anger, not revenge, just ground. And it was a strange thing to realize that the house I had cleaned, repaired, stocked, and quietly maintained for 2 decades had been protecting me all along. Sarah stared at me like I had just rewritten gravity. You're not agreeing to sell. Her voice was flat. I nodded once. No. The word sat between us like a piece of furniture no one knew how to move. The judge closed the file in front of him. If there are no further disputes regarding the deed, the court recognizes both parties as legal co-owners. Sarah leaned forward again. This is absurd. Why, the judge asked? Because she doesn't belong there. I almost smiled. Belonging had always been Sarah's favorite weapon. The lawyer cleared his throat. Ownership isn't based on sentiment. It's based on documentation. Sarah turned toward him. You're supposed to represent me. I do. Then fix this. He shook his head slightly. There's nothing to fix. The hearing ended shortly after that. Paperwork signed. Next steps explained. No dramatic exit. Just the quiet bureaucracy of probate law moving forward. Sarah walked out ahead of me. Her heels hit the courthouse tile with a sharp rhythm. I followed a few steps behind. Outside, the autumn air felt colder than it had that morning. She turned toward me immediately. You think you won something? I didn't say that. You just blocked the sale of $1 million property. I exercised a legal right. She laughed. You lived there rent-free for 20 years. The phrase again, rent-free. It had become her shorthand for erasing everything else. I paid utilities, I said calmly. That's nothing. I repaired the roof. That's maintenance. I covered Mom's medical bills twice. Sarah waved a hand. You're exaggerating. I didn't answer. Arguing with Sarah had never produced truth. Only volume. Instead, I walked toward my car. She followed. You're not keeping that house, she said. We'll see. You can't afford it. I opened the driver's door. You'd be surprised. She stopped then. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. Where do you even get money work? What kind of work accounting? She scoffed. That doesn't pay enough. Sometimes it does. I got into the car, closed the door, and drove away. The house looked different when I pulled into the driveway. The same red door, the same maple tree in the yard. But the silence inside felt heavier now. Not just grief, expectation. I walked through the front door slowly. The living room still smelled faintly of lilies from the funeral. Sarah had taken a few things already. A lamp, 2 framed photos, a ceramic bowl our mother kept near the door. Objects Sarah believed had resale value. The rest of the house was unchanged. I walked into the kitchen. The sink was empty, counters wiped. I had done that the morning of the accident. Habit, routine. I rested my hands on the counter and looked around. 20 years of mornings had started here. Coffee brewing, Dad reading the newspaper, Mom making grocery lists, Sarah complaining about something. I sat down at the kitchen table. The wood surface had a scratch near the edge. From a casserole dish dropped 15 years ago. I ran my finger over it. And for the first time since the courtroom, a question surfaced. Why had my parents added my name to the deed? They had never mentioned it. Not once. They had trusted me with almost everything. Bills, medical forms, house repairs. But this had been quiet, intentional, hidden. I stood up and walked down the hallway. Their bedroom door was still half open. The room smelled faintly of my mother's lavender lotion. I hesitated in the doorway, then stepped inside. Most of their clothes were still in the closet. Their bed was neatly made. My father had always insisted on that. At the far end of the room sat a small wooden desk. My mother used it for letters, recipe cards, and her notebooks. She loved notebooks, rows of them, Some filled, some half-used, some waiting. I opened the top drawer. Stationery, pens, a pair of reading glasses. The second drawer held envelopes and old church bulletins. The third drawer stuck slightly when I pulled it. Inside was a stack of notebooks tied together with a ribbon. I recognized them immediately. My mother's handwriting was unmistakable. Neat. Careful. Every letter shaped the same. A date marked the top of each page. Journals. I sat down in the chair, untied the ribbon, and opened the first notebook. The pages were filled with quiet observations. Small things, weather, church events, Dad's doctor appointments. Then I turned to an entry dated 11 years earlier. My name appeared in the middle of the page. Emily handled the pharmacy again today. She never complains. I kept reading. Sarah yelled this morning when I asked her to help with the dishes. Emily cleaned up after dinner without a word. The handwriting grew tighter on the next page. I worry sometimes that Emily thinks we expect too much from her. My chest tightened slightly. I turned another page. We stopped pushing Sarah because every correction turns into a fight. Emily understands responsibility better than we ever expected. I stared at the sentence for a long time. The quietness of the room seemed to deepen. Then I turned one more page. Emily will survive anything. That girl is stronger than she realizes. I closed the notebook slowly. For 20 years I had believed I was the daughter they overlooked, the one who carried the weight because no one else would. But sitting in that chair holding my mother's careful handwriting in my hands, I realized something unsettling. Maybe they had seen it all along. I stayed in that chair longer than I meant to. The house was quiet, in the way homes become quiet after the people who filled them are gone. Not empty, just still. I opened the notebook again. The pages rustled softly under my fingers. My mother had always written the way she lived. Calm, observant, patient with details other people ignored. At first the entries were simple, grocery lists, weather notes, church potluck reminders. But then I started seeing patterns. My name appeared again and again, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes half a page. Emily fixed the water heater today before your father even got home from work. Emily stayed up with me when my arthritis flared last night. Emily says she doesn't mind handling the bills. I kept reading. Each entry felt like looking at my own life from a different angle. Not the version Sarah told, not the one I had quietly believed. The version my mother had watched unfold day after day. One page caught my eye. The ink had pressed deeper into the paper like she had been thinking hard while writing. We stopped correcting Sarah because every correction turned into war. I read the line again. My stomach tightened slightly. The next paragraph explained it. Your father says she'll learn when life teaches her. I'm not sure that will happen. The handwriting shifted. Emily doesn't fight. She adapts. I leaned back in the chair. Adapt. That word had followed me most of my life. It was the polite way people describe someone who absorbs things quietly. Another page. I worry she thinks we expect too much from her. My throat tightened. I kept reading. Emily never asks why Sarah gets away with things. Maybe she thinks we love her less. The line stopped there. A space. Then another sentence written below it. That's not true. My fingers paused on the edge of the page. The house creaked softly somewhere in the hallway. I turned the page. Your father insisted we add Emily to the house deed this year. He says if anything happens to us, Sarah will sell everything in a week. The words blurred slightly. I blinked and focused again. Emily built this home with us even if she doesn't see it that way. I closed the notebook slowly. For 20 years I had thought my parents simply accepted the imbalance between their daughters. Accepted it because arguing with Sarah was exhausting. Accepted it because peace was easier than fairness. But the notebooks told a different story. They had seen it. Every dish washed, every doctor appointment scheduled, every bill paid quietly without announcement. They had seen it all. They just hadn't said it out loud. Maybe they thought I didn't need to hear it. Maybe they believed actions mattered more than explanation. Or maybe they were simply parents who loved both daughters, but understood one of them needed to be prepared for a harder road. I sat there until the afternoon light shifted across the carpet. Eventually, I closed the ribbon around the notebooks and carried them to the kitchen. The house felt different now. Not larger, not smaller, just clearer. Like a room where someone finally opened the curtains. My phone buzzed on the counter. Sarah. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. What? Her voice sounded irritated. Have you changed your mind? No. She exhaled sharply. You're being ridiculous. I don't think so. That house is too big for you. I've lived there for 20 years. That was different. How because you were helping Mom and Dad? I still live there. There was a pause. Then she said something that surprised me. You think they left it to you? I think they trusted me. She scoffed. They never said that. No, they didn't have to. The silence stretched longer this time. Then she said quietly, You always thought you were the responsible one. I didn't think it. I lived it. Her tone sharpened again. You're not keeping the house just to prove something. I looked around the kitchen, the same scratch on the table, the same refrigerator humming softly in the corner, the same window over the sink where my mother used to watch the garden in early mornings. I'm not proving anything I said. I'm just not leaving. Sarah laughed, a short, brittle sound. You'll get tired of it. Maybe. You'll sell eventually. Maybe. But not because you told me to. She hung up. I set the phone down and opened one of the kitchen cabinets. Inside were the mugs my mother had collected over 30 years. Church fundraisers, vacation stops, random gifts from neighbors. I poured myself a cup of tea and carried it to the back porch. The evening air was cool. The yard looked the same as it had when I was 15. Same fence, same uneven patch of grass near the shed. I sat down and thought about the notebooks again. About the line my mother had written. Emily will survive anything. For most of my life I had believed that sentence was a burden. Something parents say when they know you'll handle the hard parts. Now I realized something else. Maybe it was also a kind of trust. The next morning the house woke before I did. Old houses do that. Pipes shift, floorboards settle. The refrigerator hum changes pitch just before the sun rises. I had lived inside those sounds for 2 decades. Yet that morning they felt different. Not unfamiliar, just louder. Because now every corner of the house carried a question. Why had my parents never told me I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table again with the notebooks spread in front of me? The ribbon lay beside them. My mother's handwriting moved steadily across the pages like someone walking carefully through memory. Some entries were small, weather notes, garden plans. Other entries felt heavier. The day my father's blood pressure spiked. The week the washing machine broke and we couldn't afford a new one yet. And between those practical notes were quiet observations about us. About Sarah, about me. Sarah refuses to help again today. I don't know how to reach her without pushing her further away. The sentence sat there alone on the page. I turned to the next page. Emily covered the electric bill this month without mentioning it. Your father pretended not to notice, but I saw the relief on his face. I closed my eyes for a moment. For years I had assumed they didn't see the small things, that they simply accepted them as background noise. But my mother had been writing them down, recording them quietly like someone afraid the truth might be forgotten. The phone rang again around noon. Sarah, I answered. What now? Her voice sounded tighter than yesterday. I talked to a real estate agent. Okay, you're not thinking this through. I've lived there 20 years. That's not the point. What is the point? The house is worth almost $800,000. She paused as if the number should impress me. You can't just sit on that kind of money. I'm not sitting on it. Then what are you doing living in it? Her frustration sharpened. That's selfish. I almost laughed. Selfish. After 2 decades of grocery lists, hospital visits, and midnight pharmacy runs. But I didn't laugh. Because arguing with Sarah always circled the same drain. You should sell, she continued. Split the money. And then what, you move somewhere smaller. And you... She didn't hesitate. I'll invest my half. Of course she would. Sarah had always believed money was potential energy waiting to become lifestyle. I had always believed money was stability. Have you read the will, I asked? Yes. And the clause about the house, I know. Mom and Dad wanted me there. She made a dismissive sound. They were sentimental. Maybe. But they wrote it down anyway. Silence again. Then she said something softer. You really think they trusted you more? I looked at the notebooks, the pages filled with years of quiet attention. I think they trusted me differently. What does that mean? It means they knew I would take care of things. Sarah didn't respond. When she finally spoke, the edge had returned. You always liked feeling responsible. No, I just never left. She hung up again. I set the phone down and walked through the house. Living room, hallway, my parents' bedroom. Each space held memories that had once felt ordinary. Now they felt like pieces of a puzzle I had never realized was being assembled. When I reached the hallway closet, something caught my attention. A small metal lockbox sat on the top shelf. I remembered it immediately. My father kept important documents inside. Insurance, property taxes, old warranties for appliances we no longer owned. I carried it to the dining room table. The key was still taped underneath the box lid. My father believed in practical hiding places. Inside were the usual papers, deeds, insurance forms. But beneath them was a sealed envelope. My name written across the front in my mother's handwriting. Emily. Just that. Nothing else. My hands hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside was a single folded letter. I unfolded it slowly. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. Emily. If you are reading this, it means your father and I are no longer there to explain things ourselves. We know you often felt like we asked more from you than from Sarah. That wasn't because we loved you less. It was because we believed you were stronger. We stopped pushing Sarah because every push turned into distance. But you stayed. You helped. You built this home with us. That's why your name is on the house. Not as a reward, as protection. For you. And for the life you helped keep standing. Love, Mom. I sat there for a long time after reading it. The house was quiet again. But the quiet no longer felt empty. It felt like a conversation that had finally finished. The letter stayed on the dining room table for a long time. I read it 3 times. Not because the words were difficult, because they rearranged 20 years of memory in a way I hadn't expected. My parents had known. Not everything, not every small frustration, but enough. Enough to understand what had been happening in their own house. Enough to make a quiet decision. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. Then I placed it beside the notebooks. For most of my life I had believed something simple. That my parents tolerated my effort. That they relied on me because I was convenient. Now I understood something harder. They had trusted me. Trust is heavier than appreciation. It assumes strength. And strength is rarely comfortable when you're still carrying it. The doorbell rang late that afternoon. I didn't expect anyone. When I opened the door, Sarah stood on the porch. No sunglasses this time, no phone in her hand, just a coat pulled tight around her shoulders. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She stepped past me without waiting for an invitation. Looking at the house. She walked slowly into the living room. Her eyes moved over the furniture like someone cataloging objects in a store. "You really plan to stay here?" she said. "Yes." She turned back toward me. "You always were stubborn, consistent." She ignored that. "I talked to a lawyer this morning. That was quick. He said you can block the sale, yes. But he also said co-owners can force mediation eventually." "That's true." Sarah crossed her arms. So, this isn't over. No. She studied my face carefully. You look calm. I am. That's new. I almost smiled. No, you just never noticed. She walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, closed it again. Old habits. Then she turned back toward me. I don't understand something. Why you stayed? The question hung there. She wasn't asking sarcastically. For the first time in our lives, she sounded genuinely curious. I stayed because someone had to. You could have left. Yes. So why didn't you? I thought about the notebooks, the letter, the small quiet record of years my parents had watched more closely than I realized. Because this was home. She shook her head slowly. It was just a house. No, it was work. And someone needed to do it. Sarah leaned against the counter. You always thought you were saving everyone. I never thought that. Then what I was helping. That's not the same. No, but it matters. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes moved around the kitchen again. The same cabinets, the same table, the same space where most of our arguments as teenagers had happened. Then she said something that surprised me. I thought they liked me better. I didn't answer, because that belief had shaped most of her behavior for 30 years. They never pushed me, she continued. They pushed you all the time. I thought about my mother's journal entry. We stopped correcting Sarah because every correction turns into war. They were tired, I said quietly. Sarah laughed once. You're defending them now. No, I'm explaining them. She rubbed her forehead. I thought they just didn't care what I did. That's not what happened. Then what? They stopped trying. The sentence landed harder than anything else I had said. Sarah straightened slowly. Stopped trying. Yes. Why? Because they thought pushing you would make you leave. The room went quiet again. Sarah stared at the counter. Her voice was smaller when she spoke next. So they just gave up on correcting you and trained you instead. Something like realization crossed her face. That's what all the chores were. Yes. They weren't punishing you. No, they were preparing you. I nodded. Sarah leaned back against the counter and laughed again. This time it sounded hollow. All these years I thought I was the favorite. You weren't. And you weren't the maid. No. She looked around the kitchen again. The same place she had stood 3 days earlier declaring ownership. You really aren't selling. No. What happens now? I picked up the envelope from the table and handed it to her. What's this, Reddit? She unfolded the letter slowly. Her eyes moved across the page. Halfway through, she stopped. Then she read the rest. When she finished, she didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, she set the letter down. I didn't know. I know. She looked at me. For the first time in years, there was no sarcasm in her voice, just something closer to embarrassment. They trusted you. Yes. She nodded slowly. Then she looked around the kitchen one more time. I guess I owe you an apology. You owe yourself one too. She gave a short laugh. That might take longer. I nodded. Probably. The house felt different after Sarah left that evening. Not lighter, just quieter. Like something that had been rattling inside the walls for years had finally settled. I washed the 2 mugs we had used for tea and placed them upside down on the drying rack. The motion felt automatic, familiar. Some habits never disappear. Outside, the sky had turned the pale gray that comes before early autumn rain. I stepped onto the back porch with the envelope still in my hand. The yard looked exactly the same as it had when we were children. The maple tree leaned slightly to the left. The fence still had the warped board my father had promised to replace every summer for 15 years. I sat down on the porch step. For most of my life, I believed something simple. That my parents had chosen the easier daughter. That they had protected Sarah and relied on me because I was convenient. The notebooks had changed that. Not completely. There were still things I wished they had said aloud. Still moments where silence had hurt more than explanation. But the picture was clearer now. They had not chosen Sarah. They had stopped fighting her. And they had trusted me to carry the house forward. That was not favoritism. It was a quiet kind of faith. My phone buzzed again. "Sarah," I answered. Her voice sounded different this time, quieter. "I've been thinking. That's usually a good sign." She ignored the comment. "I'm not going to fight you over the house." I waited. "You could," I said. "Legally." "Yes, but I won't." There was a pause on the line. Then she said something I had never heard from her before. "I don't think I could take care of it anyway." The honesty surprised me. "You don't have to. That's the point." She sighed. "I spent 30 years thinking responsibility was something people forced on you. And now I think it's something you either pick up or you don't." The rain began softly then. Light drops against the porch railing. "You picked it up," she said. "I stayed. That's more than I ever did." The line went quiet for a moment. Then she added, "I'm not proud of how I acted. I know, especially the day I told you to leave. That was a bad day." "Yes." Another pause. "I'm sorry." The words sounded awkward coming from her, but they were real, and sometimes real apologies sound clumsy because they have no rehearsal. "Thank you," I said. "That doesn't fix everything." "No, but it matters." The rain grew heavier. Water ran down the porch steps and into the yard. Sarah cleared her throat. "So what happens now? I stay. And me? That's up to you." She laughed softly. I might finally have to learn how to live without someone cleaning up after me. That would be a good skill. "Yeah." Her voice softened. "Mom was right about something. What you do land on your feet." I looked at the yard. The garden beds my mother had loved were already starting to fill with weeds again. Spring would come soon enough. I could replant them. "Sometimes," I said, "and sometimes you just stay where you are and build something stable." She didn't answer right away. Then she said quietly, "I guess you built this house. We all did. But you kept it standing." I let the sentence sit there. Because in some ways it was true. But it wasn't a victory. It was simply the life I had lived. After we hung up, I stayed on the porch for a while longer. The rain cooled the evening air. The house behind me felt steady. Not perfect, but steady. Inside, the notebooks and the letter were still on the dining table. I knew I would keep them, not as proof, not as justification, as memory. Because families are complicated. Love is often uneven. And sometimes the child who carries the most responsibility is the one parents quietly trust to survive without them. If this story reminded you of someone who has spent years holding a family together without recognition, take a moment to tell them. And if you enjoy stories about quiet strength, difficult families, and the complicated ways love shows itself, consider following this channel for more. Sometimes the strongest people in a family are the ones no one notices until the house would fall without them.